We will begin with our panelists, which you'll have an opportunity to ask them all kinds of questions. Particularly since you've seen some of the documents, you may want to ask them things. They're open to all questions. This is not a Trump interview. Not a Trump question. And we'd like to first introduce our videographer, Mr.
Clifford Liggins.
Mr. Liggins, and he is part of the Sumner Alumni Association, their videographer, as well as, aren't you maintaining a website too?
Yes, it's a neighborhood association website, strugglershillroots.com.
Okay, fine. So, these are all kind of sources about community and legacies of Sumner that are very important in terms of, we were talking about social capital building. This is a part of it. This is the result of it. Today, I will introduce, I'm thinking I'm doing this alphabetically, and the first person on my left is Mr. Elmer C. Jackson III. As I had indicated yesterday, that he was, he's the son of the father who really, his collection is the first one that started our systematic collecting of the African American experience in the Kansas region. Mr. Jackson is a 1958 graduate of Sumner High School. He carried on the tradition and graduated, like his father, from the University of Kansas in 1962. He received his MA from Central Michigan, and he has worked, his career was one in which he was in executive positions for 26 years at General Motors Corporation. In his retirement, Mr. Jackson has worked as a senior consultant with the Center for Human Resources Solutions in Flint and others in Chicago as well. He has served as a volunteer in many of his in his community. He is a former member of the chairman of the board of LEAD Program in Business. He is also a board director of the American Jazz Museum, which you all didn't you have a chance to look at? And he was also their former director, as well as the Mount Carmel Redevelopment Corporation. And he's a member of the AFIAs. Remember we had that example of the men, he wouldn't be in there, but his father was in there. The AFIAs, and he's also a member of the Sigma Phi Phi Boule. And that was a very unique fraternity initiated by Du Bois, right? Yeah, by W.E.B. Du Bois, and it's African American leaders and are a part of that. Okay, now I've struggled with that. Okay. Our next on my right is Mr. Granville O'Neill, and he's the youngster. He graduated from Sumner in 1970, and he served as the president of his senior class. He has worked most of his years at the Kansas City, Kansas Fire Department, and he retired in 2008 as a battalion chief. He graduated from Park University with a BS and a master's degree in public administration. He also completed postgraduate work at Florida A&M for the fire service. But his real love is the fine arts. So he does a lot of the acting. He's involved with a lot of the just off Broadway theater, the Metropolitan Ensemble Theater. This is all coming out in Kansas City. And he's also curator of the Chester C. Owens, and we don't know who he is, but Chester C. Owens, the alumni room that's located in the Sumner Academy. He serves on a lot of boards and a lot of committees within his community, and he is performing a lot of plays as well. So he has a different angle, and so I think we have the 1970 annual out there for him. Our next panelist is Mr. Chester C. Owens, and Mr. Owens is the gentleman that we indicated had worked for Sewing, who had the only African American bank in the state of Kansas, And Mr. Owens worked there after graduating from Kansas City, Kansas JUCO, as well as Pittsburgh State University. He started working there as a salesman and ended up 1978 to 1998 as the president of H.W. Sewing and Company. So he's very much a businessman. He's got a lot of other business adventures as well. He is a 1949 graduate of Sumner High School, and I think we have that book out there as well. He's involved with a lot of business organizations within the Kansas City community, and he's a leader and pusher of the AME Church. He's a member, obviously, of over 70 years. He currently resides, as I mentioned before, in the home of Bishop Gray, who was a very prominent, the collection that we have is due to the donation of Mr. Owens, but he's living in his house, you know, in the man's house, which is just, and he can tell you all about that and that sort of thing. He's been active in the civil rights movement in Kansas City. He was a member of CORE, which really is the basis of the civil rights movement, of the modern civil rights movement. He's a recipient of the Kansas City, Kansas Leadership and other awards. He served in the military in the U.S. Air Force for 4 or 5 years, and he's married to a wonderful lady who is also a business person, and they are a couple for, what should I say, half a century?
Right.
Okay, that's all right.
60 years.
60 years that you all have been married.
62.
62. Our last and our probably the chair of our panel is Dr. Dolores Strickland Pinkard. And Dr. Pinkard is a member of the Sumner class of 1962. She attended the University of Kansas for her doctorate and for her MA. She went to undergrad at Emporia State. She has been recognized for her scholarship in a variety of publications. She is an active member of the Mason Memorial Community Church, and she is a person who is very active in a variety of other community activities. So something else I want to say. Oh, and she and Mr. Owens and Mr. Jackson, they've served in various capacities of the Sumner High School Alumni Association, which is very unique. It started in '96. They were, you know, celebrating their classes, but then they united and made it a national. And when they did that, they came to KU and with their collection. It was a fabulous experience. So Dr. Pinkard will start us out, and we can she'll give us the format of it and start the introductions. And maybe if you want to use this podium or not.
Thank you. I'm not going to use the podium right now because I simply want to give you an overview of how we have decided that we would do the presentation. And basically, we're going to take it chronologically. And so we're going to start with the beginnings, and one person will handle that. Then we'll move into, actually we're doing pre-Sumner beginnings and then into the beginnings, sorry. And then we'll do the beginnings of Sumner, and then we want to tell you a little bit about our Sumner alumni, what we would call the products that Sumner High School produced, and then a little bit about what caused Sumner to close, and that involves issues that I will get to toward the end of the session. I'll try to wrap everything up without repeating anything. So thank you very much, and if you're okay with us sitting, we may sit, but if you are more comfortable standing, and I will probably walk to the back so the people in the back of the room won't think they got out of hearing everything. So I'll probably move around a little bit. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning. Welcome. We hope that we will add some value to your experience here. I'm going to kick it off by giving you a little bit of information that you probably already have, but we'll reinforce it if that's the case. It's my understanding that this workshop is dealing with early Native American education as well as African American education in the state of Kansas. So it's kind of interesting that the first public school in Wyandotte County, which is where Sumner High School is located, was really opened on July 1st, 1844, by the Wyandotte Indian tribe. It was a tribe that had migrated from Ohio to Kansas, and part of the presidential administration that relocated the Indians back in the early 1800s. And that school was taught by a Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong, John Armstrong and his wife Lucy. Now, interestingly enough, they were Indians, but white children were admitted free, and they were strong anti-slavery advocates. They were abolitionists, like most of the Wyandottes, but slavery really divided the Wyandotte Indian tribe. So there were only white and Native American children that were allowed to go to that school. No black children could go to that school. January 29, 1859, the governor of Kansas signed a charter that really outlined procedures for establishing the first public school system in Wyandotte County, which later became Kansas City, Kansas. Those schools would admit children from the ages, or young people from the ages of 5 to 21, but excluded black or mulatto persons. So again, the charter stipulated that school taxes on property owned by blacks or mulattoes had to be used for education for blacks and mulattoes. So you could see what was developing was a separate system even back in the 1800s, long before the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision that really defined the separate but equal doctrine. In 1879, the Kansas legislature passed a law authorizing mixing the schools. That legislation stated that the Board of Education shall have the power to organize and maintain separate schools for the education of white and colored children, except in high school, where no discrimination shall be made on the account of color. So that prevailed, and in 1899, the Kansas City, Kansas High School was opened, and black and white and all other young people went to school together at that high school until a very unfortunate incident occurred in 1904, and you'll hear more about that. So that's the preamble for what we're going to be talking about today. Appreciate it. Thanks for your attention.
I'm going to stand. I'm vertically challenged, so that you might be able to see me. I am the curator or the caretaker or the overseer for the Chester C. Owens Alumni Room. I always was curious as to the creation of Sumner High School, what brought it about. And in 1904, there was an altercation between a white student who attended Kansas City, Kansas High School, which was the forerunner of Wyandotte High School, which exists now, and a young man by the name of Louis Gregory. Louis Gregory was not a student. He was about 17 years of age, but he was crippled. And because he was ridiculed so much because of his deformity, he did not attend school. He was bullied and so forth. Well, on April the 12th, 1904, he was snagging frogs in Kerr Park. And depending upon which source you read, because there are various storylines as to what occurred. If you read the Kansas City Star or the Kansas City Gazette, they put Louis Gregory in a very unfavorable light. saying that it was some Negro kids that were harassing white kids at this park. And these kids were, and I say kids, but these young people were practicing, some say baseball, some say it was track. At any rate, I prefer the version that I'm going to tell you because in 1904, it's hard to believe that black kids would be harassing white kids. Around the turn of the century, they were lynching black men about 150 per year. So the likelihood of a black kid or a black child or teenager, and that's what they were, harassing white kids is rather far-fetched. But at any rate, there was a confrontation between Louis Gregory and a young man by the name of Roy Morton. And so when they saw him shagging these frogs or snaring these frogs, it wasn't unusual for people who did this to carry a pistol or a rifle to shoot the larger frogs before they jumped back into the pond. Well, they decided, these young men, white men, young men, decided they wanted to see him run. They wanted to chase him just to see him run because he was, as I stated, crippled. He ran, they did chase him. He ran to where he had placed his firearm. He grabbed it and just turned and fired. Well, when he did that, he hit Roy Martin, another 17-year-old, hit him in his aorta, killing him instantly. And the city was outraged. The white community was outraged. Once that occurred, the white children didn't want to go to school with the black kids anymore. And so Louis Gregory was eventually arrested.